Hey everybody, I'm John VanDuzer with James Moore and Company, and I'm here with Nick Banks, Principal and Managing Director with Avison Young, and we are continuing our discussion on the top 10 real estate trends as put out by Avison Young. So thank you, Nick, for sharing this, and really
Great.
excited to finish our discussion. And if you haven't already, make sure to click the link and to read the trends. It's a very good, worthwhile read. And so thanks, Nick, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So we're going to pick up our discussion on trend number 5, which was managing expectations. And so discussing property management. So why don't you tell us about this trend?
Yeah, I tell you, the property managers have been the real heroes in the commercial real estate business throughout this whole, pandemic and shutdown. I mean, they've really, in our industry, they've been on the front lines, and they're, many of the folks in our industry have been able to work remotely. If you're a property manager, a building engineer, that's work that you can't do remotely. I mean, they've
Right.
been there at the buildings and making sure that they're functional and operational and safe and secure. And so, they've been just resilient heroes, in making sure that our clients' interests have been maintained and looked after. And having to deal with really, circumstances that were uncharted waters, that
Hmm.
nobody really knew how to deal with in a very short period of time. And so, a lot of changes have been made. A lot of changes, I'm sure, will are still to come as buildings and companies reoccupy spaces. But yeah, just a few things. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about clean air filtration and touchless work environments where people don't have to touch door handles, elevator buttons, touchless restrooms and things like that. So I think there is a lot of and all those things, by the way, are not they're not quick fixes that a building owner can just go in and alter immediately, and they
Hmm.
are not inexpensive. And it is a building upgrade that a building owner generally can't attribute revenue to. And so, there are some challenges to overcoming these things, and so it won't be immediate. But I think in terms of new building design or when buildings are retrofitted or when they're remodeled, I think a lot of these design elements will start to see because it's not as much of a local issue here. As you know, we have a lot of single story and low rise, mid
Right.
rise kind of buildings, but in more urban areas where you have people waiting in long lines to get on elevators because elevator capacity is limited now. It's a big cause for concern, and there are a lot of people trying to figure out how do we manage that. Do we stagger different start times and ending times for people's work days? And so I think a lot more to come on that. There have been some amazing adaptations already, but I think we'll continue to see those.
Yeah. No, that's all great. Yeah, and you think about it, you can't shove 20 people on an elevator anymore. So
Right.
it's a real challenge, especially in those urban areas. Having gone through kind of a tough economic times, especially starting in March when there was kind of a shock to the system, how have tenant and landlord relationships changed? And then as a property manager, kind of being in the middle of everything, what has that dynamic been like?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, now certainly accommodations, were made, for certain businesses, and a lot of that depended on the landlord's capacity and willingness to be able to be flexible.
Hmm.
And a lot of that was predicated upon their lender and loan covenants that would permit that flexibility. So it's always more complicated than it seems like maybe it should be from the outside. But I would say most professional office space, the tenants were able to maintain the space, maintain their leases, continue to pay rent. So we didn't see as much need for rent forgiveness, rent forbearance, or deferring rent than we thought we would see when this first began. And so now going forward, what we're hearing from tenants is that they're still in a state of flux of trying to determine how much space do we need, how are we going to use our space, what does the functionality look like, and there seems to be a trend towards a desire for more flexibility, meaning my space may fluctuate. I want a shorter lease term. I want the ability to grow or shrink as needed. And so I think we're still not at that point of equilibrium where corporate users have the information they need to be able to predict their space needs going forward, for the next several years. So that's still, I think, being determined by a lot of companies.
Yeah, and that's gonna, that has a whole Pandora's box worth of issues and questions and economics and everything that goes around that.
Right.
How are you seeing technology change property management?
I think generally speaking, the commercial real estate industry has been somewhat archaic in terms of its adopting technology or adapting to technology. That's changing rapidly. I mean, I just know within our own company, our reliance on technology and data is just light years ahead of where we were even a year ago. So that landscape is changing rapidly. From a building management standpoint, being able to remotely monitor a building, being able to handle all the mechanical systems and the HVAC and oversee that, we're seeing rapid advances in that as well. And that is something that will continue to evolve, and I think will be something that going forward we'll continue to see. But the ability to maintain, evaluate, and really just control a building remotely is just something that we'll continue to see.
Yeah, and so I've seen this whole kind of industry pop up called prop tech,
Yep.
where it's things like that you can remotely monitor and manage a building, and I think it's fascinating, everything that's come along with technology.
Yeah, well, look, it's the Internet of Things, and so as the Internet is encapsulated into more and more devices and machinery, so whether that's elevators or HVAC systems or door controls or security systems or cameras, whatever it is, just bringing that all together is becoming more feasible. And landlords want it, tenants want that, they want those controls, and it just it makes it easier for business owners and landlords to make decisions.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we're going to skip down to trend number 9, and this is going to be the final trend that we discuss. But tell us about building a recovery.
Yeah, so it's interesting, infrastructure, we've always thought of infrastructure as roads and bridges and things like that, but a major point of infrastructure now that is just even more and more critical is just the digital infrastructure that is needed for businesses to operate. And you and I have had conversations just about, we live in a suburban, mid-sized city of Gainesville, but we're surrounded by a pretty rural area in north central Florida. So a lot of our workforce that works inside our city limits, they live in these more rural areas where maybe access to high-speed internet and other things is just not as pervasive as if they lived closer in. And so that's a challenge to overcome. And so it's easy to say, for a company to say, well, we're just going to let people work remote. But if you live in a more rural area and you don't have access to those tools, that may not be possible. And so I think just understanding those needs, continuing to build out that infrastructure, I think communities have that on their radar and want to make sure that we're prepared. I've heard analogies to high-speed internet, being as important as 200 years ago, living in proximity to a river, that was the main source of transportation. And so you look at how cities were developed, it was all in proximity to waterways because it was transportation and their ability to move people and goods, to and from places. The high-speed internet, I mean, that is our decades river, that everybody needs access to and proximity to. So providing those tools, making sure those infrastructure needs are met, I think that will just be critical to this movement towards a more remote, flexible workforce that seems to be a trend that will continue.
Yeah, and especially as people move out of the urban areas and into the more suburban or rural areas, that demand is only going to go up. There was an article a while back that coined the term Zoom towns, where you had kind of in the Midwest, people moving to the Midwest and working remotely,
Right.
and their infrastructure and their needs as far as internet and that sort of thing, the bandwidth that they were serving doubled, overnight. My internet provider, I was checking an outage this past weekend, and they gave their little disclaimer that they're working really hard to make sure that everybody can have the amount of internet that they need, and the bandwidth that they need, so all the Zoom meetings and everything can proceed.
Right.
So the interesting thing about this trend, I think, is really, like you said, saying, hey, a good way to recover economically is to stimulate infrastructure, right? And America has a history of that, even going back to, the 1930s and 40s and
Right.
beyond World War II. But looking at infrastructure again, saying it's more broad than roads and bridges. It's digital, it's social, it's medical, it's green energy. So how much of these alternative forms of infrastructure are you seeing come up, around us? I think, when I look at things, I say, okay, medical in Gainesville, I feel like in the last 10 years, that's really proliferated, where there's a much stronger
Right.
medical presence between the two kind of major hospitals in our market than there was. And then green infrastructure, I know on my way to pick up my daughter from ballet, I passed by a really large solar farm
Mhm.
that just was recently built. So what kind of alternative infrastructure have you seen kind of in our markets?
Well, I would say so. Two things. I think you're right. I mean, it's happening all around us, and not just here, but everywhere. We're seeing those changes and shifts towards green, renewable energy, environmental impact, social impact. I would say that, and look, this is a trend that has been happening for a few years, but there is even a brighter light shown on it now. But the whole ESG, environmental, social, green movement, it is a part of almost I mean, our clients are asking, our prospects are asking, they want to know what our policies are as a company. They want to know what we're doing, how we embrace that, how all of those issues weave into how we conduct ourselves, how we do business. But we're participating in a major RFP right now for a large company that has a retail presence nationally. And that was a big part of our presentation to them, is are all of those things, environmental and social, because it's a big part of their business as well. And so that's I wouldn't even call that a trend at this point. I think it's just table stakes for how companies do business and what the expectation is. But it's not just about business anymore. It's about how it's all woven together with environmental and social and green energy and everything else that's involved.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, that's all the time we have. So, and that was all the trends. So, thank you, Nick, for joining us. And it's always a great experience to talk to you. I feel like you're just so insightful. So, I really appreciate your time and your effort to talk
Well,
through all of everything.
yeah, thank you, John. I enjoyed it, and I look forward to keeping in touch. Thanks for the time.
Awesome. Thanks.
To learn more about James Moore and Company's real estate accounting and business solutions, go to jmco.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our Real Estate Industry Update series to receive updates when new videos are released. If you'd like to be a guest, or if there's a topic you'd like to see covered on a future episode, contact us through our website or email us at info@jmco.com. You can also follow us on social media for more news as the landscape of real estate continues to rapidly evolve.